All right, so let's make a start. Yeah, so welcome again to the fourth week of Transforming Work, and yeah, what we're going to do. Well, it's the last week actually of the course. What we're going to do this evening is we're going to explore the third of the three lakshanas. We looked at impermanence and unsatisfactoriness last week. Tonight we're going to look at insubstantiality, and then we're going to do a little bit of meditation, and then we'll spend a little bit of time reviewing the course. Just partly what that's about is just me getting a little bit of feedback about how the course has gone for everybody. Then we'll have a break, and then there will be an opportunity for questions after the break. So if you've got questions about what we look at this evening or questions from previous evenings, that will be an opportunity to bring that in there. And then we'll hear a little bit more about tonight's theme. So we'll be looking at what are called the Three Fetters. And we'll have our breakout rooms at the end. So part of the purpose of the breakout rooms is to give you a bit of a chance to just reflect back over the course and reflect on what it is that you might like to bring into the next part of your life from what we've been looking at. And then we'll finish at 9 o'clock as normal. So just in terms of, I just want to give you a bit of a recap of the ground that we've covered over the last 3 weeks. So yeah, on the first week, we looked at ethics in relation to work. So really what we've been doing on this course is just looking at some very, very fundamental, essential Buddhist themes and thinking about them in relation to what goes on in our working life. So what we looked at in the first night was the first of the 5 precepts, which is the precept about loving kindness. So just a simple idea that we need to remember that other people exist when we're going about our day, when we're going about our working day. And remember that for us, work has got all kinds of things riding on it. And actually for other people, work has got all kinds of things riding on it. And if we remember that, we'll just be much more ethical, much more decent, much more honest, etc., in the way that we relate to other people. And then in the second week, we focused on the 5th precept, so the precept on awareness, on mindfulness. And we saw how we've got present moment awareness, that sense of being aware of what's going on in the moment. But we've also got 2 other aspects of mindfulness, the sense of continuity of purpose. So deciding what we're doing and then bringing that task to a completion before we pick up another task. So completing our cycles. And then thirdly, ethical sensitivity, that mindfulness that lets us know that we need to be aware of how we're acting with our body, with our speech, with our mind, and how that was setting up conditions to the future. So particularly understanding our actions of body, speech, and mind in terms of them being either skillful or unskillful. And then we saw how meditation is where we try and develop an uninterrupted stream of skillful mental states, and how we can continue that process of working in that way in the course of our working life. So actually working on our mind in the midst of our activities and seeing how that's not just possible, but actually really necessary if we're going to make any real progress in developing our mind. So what we looked at last week is we began to look at the stage of wisdom. So this is about transforming our perspective so that we're seeing things more clearly as they really are. We also saw that if that's based on ethics and meditation, it'll go much deeper. Yeah, so it's not just that we're trying to be more skillful so that we'll create better conditions in the future, but we're trying to be more skillful because a more skillful mind will be a more fertile ground for the arising of wisdom, for the arising of insight, for the arising of a true seeing of what's really going on. And what we saw was that kind of insight is liberating. When we're living free from delusion, it's like we've been let out of jail, we've been liberated. So ignorance from the Buddhist perspective is not bliss. Ignorance is slavery. It's like being oppressed or being in a state of incarceration. So part of what we saw last week is that we have views, that we have these habitual ways of looking at things that kind of filter what comes in through our senses. So it's like we've already got a bias, we've already even got a prejudice about what's going on. we're thinking about things quite often in an unhelpful way, in a way that will perpetuate or even deepen our sense of deludedness, or our sense of living in a kind of parallel reality from actual reality. So what we talked about was this process of moving from unhelpful ways of thinking to helpful ways of thinking, to actually just seeing things as they really are, as it were, free from thought. So in other words, we move from wrong views to right views to perfect views. And we can actually practice that by seeing if we can look at things through the lens, so to speak, of the three lakshanas, the three marks of conditioned existence, seeing that things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and insubstantial. And we also saw last week that we can deepen that process of developing wisdom by simply speaking the truth, by saying what's real and what's true and what's actually happening, and training in that constant referencing of what's real by actually saying what's real and not trying to dissemble or misrepresent. So just a little reminder of those three lakshanas. I'm going to do a few more slides tonight. I hope that's okay for everybody. I'm not going to overdo it, hopefully. But anyway, I've got a few slides. So so these are the three marks of conditioned existence. So it's said that if we look at what arises in our lives as being impermanent, unsatisfactory, and insubstantial, by trying to see impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality, we're more likely to see what's really going on and more likely to wake up to what's really going on. Yeah. So they're really crucial ways of looking at things, crucial ways of trying to bring about a liberating perspective. Now, what we saw in terms of impermanence was one way of noticing impermanence is noticing when there's a discrepancy between what we expect to happen and what we've planned and what actually arises. And actually working not just with the idea that arises in our mind, but working with our emotional reactions as part of working with these lakshanas. It's a much more holistic thing than just doing a trick in our brain. It's a much more like I say, holistic kind of practice. And then there's unsatisfactoriness. So unsatisfactoriness, you could say, is what impermanence feels like. It's what arises when we don't see impermanence and things are just unsatisfactory. They're not quite what we expected. So we feel let down, we feel disappointed, we feel lost, etc. So that's unsatisfactoriness. So I think it's really important because it's a feeling. I mean, the word literally is dukkha, which literally means pain or suffering. So it's not just an idea, it's a feeling. Unsatisfactoriness is something that we feel. We feel dukkha. And work is a really, really good place to notice that because we encounter all kinds of things that we can't avoid. We can avoid them maybe in different parts of our lives, but in work, we're going to experience dukkha one way or another. And how we respond to that is really crucial. So that's familiar ground, probably. That's what we looked at last week. And that brings us to the third of the three lakshanas, which is insubstantiality. So what does this mean? What does this mean? How can we see things in a way that reveals their insubstantiality? And what I want to do is look at this by starting with impermanence. So when we think about something being impermanent, we think about a thing that comes into being and then at a certain point passes out of being. And it's as if the change that takes place happens to that particular entity. So the example I've got is a little bit out of season. So apologies for that. But the example I have is a leaf in the autumn time, a leaf changing color. So in about 6 months, the leaves that are now bursting into life will be going brown and eventually falling from the tree. So the way we usually think about that is that, the leaf turns from green to brown, or from green to red to brown. And then the leaf falls from the tree and the leaf rots. And it suggests that all the way through that process, there's this thing called a leaf which remains unchanged. So it's as if the way we talk about it is that the change happens to the leaf, as if the leaf persists as a solid entity through that period of time whilst it changes. So that's impermanence, yeah? So impermanence happens to the leaf in autumn. In the same way we think of our own body, and we think of change happening to our body. So we first of all, I was just weirdly, actually, coincidentally, I was talking to my mother last night, and my sister's had a child recently. And of course, what happens when you have grandkids, this is my mother's first grandkid, is it brings to mind all her experience as being a mother. So she was telling me about her child giving birth to me, which was kind of a slightly weird thing to talk about with your mother. It's quite, she was quite, let's just say she was quite medical about some of the particulars of that event, which was slightly strange, but actually, it's quite a while ago now, so it felt quite natural. But anyway, so I talk like that was me then, that child that was born 40 plus years ago, and now I'm here, and change has happened. But I talk as if there's a me that's continued through that process. But when you start looking a little bit more closely, you realize that's the way we talk. That's the way we talk about the process. But actually the process doesn't contain an unchanging entity that persists through time. That's just the way of talking. But we assume that there's actually something there that corresponds to the way that we talk about things. So seeing that is seeing insubstantiality. So seeing that things are insubstantial. They don't have an unchanging essence or an unchanging core. So sometimes the way it's put is that all conditioned things are devoid of unchanging selfhood. So what this means is that really what there is change. When we go more and more deeply into it, we realize that there's just change occurring at all levels. So there's change occurring at the level of the physical world, like plate tectonics and the way the ocean currents move. There's change taking place in terms of the way minerals interact with each other. There's gravity, there's all these different things. There's the way organisms come into being, the way plants reproduce and animals reproduce, and animals know the way they can fly from one side of the world to the other side of the world. There's all these strange and mysterious things that happen. Things arise in terms of our own mind, our own conditioning. Like, because I'm from New Zealand, I speak in a way that's a little bit similar, but not entirely the same as Liz, who's from Tasmania. There's ways that we talk, and ways that we are that are based on what's come before, and that's all changing. There's actually us as an individual living being, and the way that that we're transformed moment by moment by the way that we act. So basically, Buddhism sees that the whole process of existence is dynamic, that there's nothing lying behind it that remains unchanged. And the really challenging bit about that is that we're part of that too. Each individual human being is part of that too. So when you apply that principle of insubstantiality to an individual human being, you get what's called the not self doctrine. And the Sanskrit is anatman, which literally means not self. No self. And sometimes this can lead people up the garden path a little bit, because it sounds a little bit maybe nihilistic. But it's not saying that you don't exist. It's saying that you don't exist in the way that you usually think you exist. So it's in a way, another way of putting it, which is more in keeping with this idea of the dynamic nature of existence is that it's not that we don't have a self, is that it's that we always have a new self. So we always have a new self. Now, because we often create, according to the way that we act, we often create a self, a new self that's very similar to the self that preceded it. It appears that we stay the same because there's not much difference between the self that comes into being and the self that preceded it. But if the new self that arises is an improvement, as it were, if qualities come into being that weren't there previously, then we can say that spiritual growth is happening or transformation is happening. And that's really what the Dharma is concerned with. It's concerned with recognizing that flux, recognizing that flow, recognizing the dynamic nature of existence, and in a way, as it were, cooperating with that, so that we begin to flow, we begin to live in accordance with that reality, and we begin to develop qualities that weren't there before, so that we end up with two kind of different modes of being. One mode of being is what we could call the wheel. And I've got another little image here, which I think illustrates this quite well, which is where basically we go round and round in circles and we just recreate the person that we were and the way that we were. So I've got a wee image for that. So it's a bit direct in a way, but like the idea of a hamster on a wheel, we just kind of go around in circles and we recreate the same kind of conditions and have the same kind of experience. Now, I gather that some of you have been looking at your work and actually have found that you can enjoy your work a lot more just by being a little bit more creative in the way that you respond to it. So what's happening there is that even though we might be going round and round still, we can also be going up and up. So there's another image that I wanted to show you, and this is an image of growth. So this is an image of a spiral where we're still going round and round to some extent, but we're also going up and up. There's growth happening, there's unfoldment happening, and I just wanted to just show you that image as well, the image of a spiral. So this is actually, I mean, a very important image in New Zealand of a fern unfolding. It's kind of almost a national symbol of a fern frond unfolding. But what it represents is something new coming into being and unfolding and growing. It's very expressive. Also, a spiral symbolizes kind of depth. If you look to a spiral, it symbolizes that concentration and that penetration into the true nature of things, which is what wisdom really is. So that's the spiral. So you've got these two tendencies within this dynamic unfoldment of reality. You've got a sort of a cyclical dynamic, a cyclical trend where things just kind of happen in the same old way, and you've got the spiral trend where something new emerges. So what we're trying to do is to see that things are much more fluid than they appear to be. The way to start is just to keep reflecting on impermanence, just to notice the change that's happening all the time, and in a way to kind of cooperate with it. And that's what everything that we've looked at on this course, that's what all of it does. So if we practice the precepts, if we're kinder to people, we'll notice who people actually are, and the fact that our ideas about them might be wrong, or they might be out of date. Often we relate to people according to the way they were, not the way that they currently are. We don't kind of allow them to change. We don't allow new things to come into being. And if we hate them, that'll fix them. So hatred has a kind of a fixing, a rigidifying kind of tendency. Whereas love, metta, is much more sensitive and much more responsive to what's actually happening. In the same way, generosity, the second precept, is well, that's in a way responsiveness par excellence. It's that way of um, let the more we let go of holding on to a fixed view of who we are and what the world is, will naturally express that in terms of generosity. So generosity, you could say, is like the natural expression of an awareness of insubstantiality. When we hold on to ourselves, when we're rigid, when we think that because we've been a particular way in the past that we'll always be that way into the future, everything becomes more rigid and more solid. Um, and similarly with the other precepts, of course, you could look at look at contentment in terms of that sense of impermanence. Is that what it suggests is that all you really have is what you have now. Everything else might not be there tomorrow. When we crave, when there's that sense of hankering after something, that we've got an idea of something that we can get and sometime in the future. But again, we don't know if that's going to come to pass. So we can keep on setting up things in the future that we want to attain or possess that we never actually end up attaining or possessing because they never come into existence. So all we know is what was here now. Similarly, I talked about the relationship between wisdom and truthfulness last week, and then mindfulness. The more mindful we are, the more attentive we are, the more integrated we are. The integration is what arises in dependence upon mindfulness. The more we'll be able to just see what's in front of us, the more we'll be able to pay attention and really keenly and finely and sensitively attend to our experience as it's happening moment by moment, and really see what's happening. So the reason I'm saying all of that is to make the point that wisdom in Buddhism is not just a thought. It often arises partly in dependence upon the way that we think, but it's a much deeper thing than just a thought. You could say it's a realization. So it has a cognitive aspect, a thinking aspect, but it's also got an emotional aspect and a volitional aspect. In other words, it actually changes the way that we live in the world, that we are in the world. We kind of enter a flow. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about work later, but I think if you're able to notice what's really going on, you'll be able to respond to whatever work throws at you much more creatively. I think often what happens with work is we get stuck in a habit of doing it in a particular way, and the work can often have the semblance of permanence. We turn up at 8 o'clock, we clock in, we do the same task that we always do, and it gives us a sense that there's something that doesn't change. You know how people can get really, really terribly thrown when they've been working for a long time and they might get made redundant, or the company might close down, or the work that they've been doing is no longer required. There's that classic thing that happens. I mean, the classic thing that used to happen, I don't know if this still happens, is that somebody would have a career for 40 years. Particularly this seemed to happen to men. They'd retire, and then a few years later they'd drop dead because they just couldn't. They'd been in that rhythm for so long that they couldn't respond to the change when it happened. Anyway, so it'd be interesting for you to reflect, I'm sure, about how all this relates to your working life. We'll do that a little bit more after the break. What I want to do after the break is talk a little bit about what are called the Three Fetters, which are actual barriers that we need to break through, we need to burst in order to see this truth of insubstantiality more clearly. So I'll talk about that at the break, and we'll hear a little bit more about how this pertains to work. But what I want to do now is actually just meditate for a while, and just see if we can notice this sense of flow. So if you just want to set yourselves up, and we'll just enter into a period of meditation. So taking the time that you need to make sure you're going to be comfortable and relaxed for the next while. And just beginning to attend to what's happening. So because of the fact of impermanence, what's gone before doesn't have any substantial reality to it other than what we remember, which itself is partial. And what's going to happen in the future is unknown to us. We've got some idea about what's likely to happen, sure, but we can't and don't know the particular nature of what's going to arise. So what we're left with, and it's a lot, is what's presently arising. So what is that? So what's the space that we're in? So we have an experience of being in a particular place, taking up a portion of space, and existing in relation to other objects and other people that also take up a portion of space. So we feel this kind of barrier between what's us and what's not us, what's mine and what's not mine. In reality, there's just a series, a process of arising of different experiences, different events, which, because it's unfolding moment by moment, we can't actually own or possess. It can't be mine. And we know that because we can't control it. We can influence, but we don't have full and complete mastery or control, for example, of our body. So beginning to tune into your body, just the raw fact of its existence, the fact of the experience of touch, your body touching what you're sitting on. The sensations on your feet, your legs, your buttocks on your cushion. And seeing if you can just notice its existence without it needing to be yours. Just allowing it to be experience, free from it needing to be owned. Often that sense of ownership comes with an attitude of tension or hardness or rigidity, an actual physical thing. Being aware of the shoulders and the face. So the shoulders soft, the face soft. And if you notice a sense of rigidity or tension, noticing if there's a corresponding emotion or memory or thought or collection of thoughts associated with that tension. Holding on to something painful or holding on to something pleasurable. Trying to resist the flow of life. And having that same attitude towards our thoughts. So like physical sensations, thoughts just arise. They're there for a while and they change. They're even more evanescent than feelings in the body. So sometimes our thoughts are like a flock of birds or a school of fish. They might be moving in a particular direction, and they might change the way a school of fish changes direction if there's a predator or some kind of obstacle. There's a sense of movement, but no one entity or thing that makes that movement happen. And what we're thinking about now, we haven't always thought about, probably when we were 9 or 10 years old. Most of what we're thinking about now, we probably hadn't occurred to us to be something to think about. And maybe one day, later in life, the things that we think about now won't be of any concern to us at all. So that's the inner world, the body, feelings in the body, thoughts. There's emotions as well. So recognizing the insubstantial character or nature of emotion. Can you discern, can you find anything within your emotional experience which is unchanging? Something in the center around which all other events and experiences constellate? So can you find anything in your body, your feelings, your emotions and your thoughts that is unchanging, that is essential, that's like a core? Something positioned in space, something thought about as existing in time. Can you find that center, that unchanging, essential core? Or is experience really like clouds, a flock of birds, or a school of fish? So we think about the outside world as being fixed. But when we've got our eyes closed and we're meditating, what do we actually experience? What do we really know of the outside world? So there's sound. So just noticing the fact of sound. Not worrying so much about what is producing the sound, but just noticing sound itself. And then tuning into your breathing. And what's amazing about our breathing is that it just happens. We don't need to will it to happen. It just arises. So just letting it do that, letting the breath do what it does. So the whole of our experience is like a cloud or a rainbow. It's open and clear and insubstantial. And just sitting with the facts of our experience. So this course that we've been on together is also an example of something insubstantial. We call it a course. We come together every Tuesday, 35 or 40 of us. We talk with each other. We meditate together. We hear about different things to do with our work, to do with the Dharma. And now that's dissolving. As all things dissolve that come into being. So we'll move into a slightly different mode. And what I'd invite you to do, we're going to move into a mode of just reviewing the course that we've done. Just reflecting on what you appreciated about the course and maybe what you found lacking. So anything that you wished had been in the course that wasn't in the course, or things that were in the course that you felt didn't really belong there. So you might like to just leave the meditation, or you might like to just sit in meditation, contemplating those questions. So yeah, so what what we'll do now is we'll just have a period of just to review the course. So um, just before I'm basically just going to ask you to write in the chat box. Um, it's possible on Zoom to do a kind of elaborate poll with multiple choice and everything. But actually, what I've noticed is that the most useful comments are the ones that are direct comments. So people actually saying, "This was really good. I didn't like that very much," or I don't know, just actually direct comments rather than just sort of general marks out of 10, if you see what I mean. Um, so, so I've got those two questions for you, which I'll put in the chat box. Where have they gone? Oh yeah. So I've got this. So this is feedback to put in the chat box. So I'll just put these questions in there. Oh, thanks, Anna. So there's something. So maybe you could write something that you appreciated, something that you found lacking, or were there any particular topics that you would have liked to have covered in the course that we didn't get to? So I'm aware that we've just had 4 weeks, and in the future I'd like to do a longer course. So I'd just be interested if there was things that came up, for example, in your work. Like I know for Liz was writing in the Slack channel about speech and about that whole area of of when negativity comes up in work, and how you respond to that in terms of what you say. Um, so yeah, so and with that in mind, I mean, when we put this course on, we were kind of feeling that people didn't want to do big long courses. Just I think there's a lot of like people just fed up with everything. Maybe we still are fed up with everything, but we just put on the course. So what I was thinking about doing is doing an extra week. So I'd be interested to know if that would interest you. Some of you will probably have things in your calendar, so you won't be able to. But I was thinking about just doing an extra week if you're interested. So what I'll do is I've just put those questions in the box. Now, anything that you think is relevant, I'll be really, really grateful to hear it. Anna's saying yes. So thanks, Anna. So what you can do actually is Stephen's going to set a poll going, and you can actually, it's a multiple choice thing, and so that's one of the questions. Would you be interested in an extra class next Tuesday, the 11th of May? And I'm not asking you to commit to it. I'm just asking, would you be interested? Because if like 2 people are interested and everyone else isn't, I won't do it. But if 20 people are interested, I will, if you see what I mean. So just to gauge interest. And the other idea that I had, and this might be something that happens in the future, but they do this in our centre in Auckland in New Zealand, but they just have a weekly group that meets every like Thursday morning for like 45 minutes or an hour, and they just talk about their work in relation to the Dharma and how they're putting Dharmic principles into practice in their work. So I'd also be interested just to know if that would be something that interested you, to have a sort of a weekly gathering where the express purpose is to talk about work as practice, as it were, or how that we can put the Dharma into practice. So there's those 2 questions. So Stephen, could you roll that now, that poll?
Yeah, it's going already. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, I can't see it for some reason. Man, that's weird. Can everyone else see it? Yeah. Cool. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, if you can fill in the poll, and when you've filled in the poll, if you could write some comments, I'd be really, really grateful. It's really good to know if things about the course you didn't find were great. I'd really, really like to know about that. I won't take it personally. Yeah, is that clear what I'm asking you to do? Fill in the poll and then write a few comments, and then we'll come back at 10 past 8 for the second part. And if you've got any questions, you also put them in to the chat. That'd be terrific. Yeah, is that all? I'm not sure if I said that very clearly, but is that all clear? Yeah, terrific. Great, thanks. All right, so we'll make a start. So just got one question as far as I can see. Thanks for all the comments, everybody. It's very, very helpful actually to get those. So let me just see if I can find this question again. Yeah. I am experiencing energy when meditating, so mild shaking movement of the body. I am not afraid. I think this is the prana. Would be grateful for any other perspective on this. Thank you. Um, well, that's great to hear that you've got something. Oh, and let me just change my microphone actually. Sorry about that. That should sound a bit better. Um, so yeah, so when energy is released, I mean, I've been talking about integration, about how when we start developing awareness, we start unifying ourselves. And often that involves the release of energy, like energy that's been kind of locked up or bound up or stifled or stymied, um, is released. Very often, actually, that happens in relation to things that have happened to us that we haven't been able to fully let go of. So we kind of clench around them in some part of ourselves, and it locks up our energy. And then when we experience a release, yeah, we experience the energy, the sort of energy moving in our body. So, um, in the Buddhist context, it's talked about. I mean, energy is just energy. I mean, you can call it prana, you could call it energy, you could call it lots of things. Um, in the Buddhist tradition, it's called priti, which means something like rapture or ecstasy. So that when the energy is released, it's sort of can we feel it in our body. It feels like energy in our body, and that can deepen into what's called sukha, which means bliss. Where in a way the fizziness and the kind of effervescence of that energy release calms down to something sort of deeper and softer and smoother and calmer, and that is sukha. So it's a really good sign that that your awareness is going deeper, and that in a way more of yourself is becoming available, more of your energy is becoming available as that energy is kind of integrated, as that awareness deepens. So it sounds great. That's the kind of I was talking earlier about the spiral. This image of a spiral, and there is a whole sequence of positive spiritual and emotional states that arise as a sequence. And what you start with, actually, interestingly, in that positive sequence of mental states and is dukkha. Actually, is unsatisfaction. You realize that the way that you're living is not the way it should be. There's something deeper. There's some kind of deeper significance in life, and you have this experience of what's called shraddha, which is where you recognize that there is actually some point to life, that you can grow and develop, and that there's the Buddha exists, this human being who is free, and that you can become like that as well if you practice the Dharma. So faith emerges, or what we call faith or shraddha, and what arises in dependence upon that is joy. You're just delighted that you've found something, and then what arises in dependence upon that is pretty, is that rapture I was just describing. And then there's a whole sequence that arises from that prashrabdi, which is like tranquility, like a pliancy of mind, and then sukha, bliss, and then concentration. So samadhi, this deep sense of the unification of our energy. So we're able to just be completely present, completely still. And then what arises in dependence upon that is wisdom, is what we've been talking about, is knowledge and vision of things as they really are. So when that samadhi is coupled with, that unification of energy is coupled with a reflection on the three lakshanas, this knowledge and vision of things as they really are. And then we begin to untangle ourselves from the whole conditioned process, all the different entanglements and knots, and complications that we get into. And that involves a liberation, a freeing. And there's a stage of disentanglement, and then a stage of sort of dispassion. So in a way, the kind of hunger and the thirst, the sort of longing that drives us on into further entanglements is pacified. And then there's liberation, vimukti, which literally means freedom or liberation. And finally, there's knowledge of the fading away of what I call the ashrivas, or the kind of these sort of poisonous fluxes which flood the mind. So that's the whole kind of spiral. So you can see how one sort of experience gives rise to something which is deeper than the previous experience, which brings it to fulfillment. So pretty, which you just mentioned, belongs in that sequence. So it's definitely a sign that you're moving in the right direction. It looks like there's a few other questions there. Thanks for putting the little Q in front. That helps. Why do we hold on to painful situations? Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Because it sounds silly, doesn't it? Like something is painful and we hang on to it. Probably we hang on to painful things because they're familiar. So I mentioned earlier, this insubstantiality. That's the truth of things, but we don't see it. We tend to kind of hold on because we want to have some kind of a sense of identity. We want to feel secure. So even though things are painful to us, sometimes they feel comfortable and we feel secure in that discomfort. It's quite weird, but we do that. The story from the Buddhist tradition that illustrates that is the story of the fishmonger and the florist. Some of you will have heard this before. So the story is that the fishmonger is in the village, and she goes into the village and she sells all her fish. She's actually got a lot of fish to sell that day. She's got her fish basket, and she stays in the market for so long that it becomes dark and she's not able to go to the neighboring village. So she realized that she's going to have to stay in the market town overnight. And her cousin is a florist. So what she says to her cousin, the florist, is it okay if I stay in your flower shop overnight? And then I'll leave in the morning. And the cousin says, that's fine. So the fishmonger, she lays down in the flower shop to sleep. But the beautiful smell of the roses is so overpowering, she can't sleep because she's not familiar. She's not used to that smell. So what she does is she has to put the fish basket over her head to get to sleep, because the stinking smell of the sort of half-rotten fish is necessary for her to feel comfortable so she can sleep. So it's an illustration of this sort of psychological fact that actually quite often we'll stick with something that's familiar to us, even though actually it's not very good for us, or it's not what's best for us. And that particularly pertains to work. Often we might not be enjoying our work. We know we need to change, but it's familiar. It provides us a sense of security, and it's sort of seductive in that way. So that's one answer. It's almost just, so in a sense, what I'm saying is we stay sometimes in painful situations just because of the force of habit. There was another question there. Hopefully that makes sense, Monica. Yeah. How do we set how do we set work boundaries in a metaphor way when facing our bosses, especially relating to workload, incoming communication outside work hours? So I have to confess that I don't have much personal experience of this, and it would be naive to say that there's a simple answer to that. But I suppose what I can say is that if you say no with metta, it's much more likely to be perceived well than if you say no with aversion. Now, it's a complex business. I mean, and what can you actually say? I mean, the danger is that on one hand you say no, and you get into trouble. On the other hand, the danger is that you say yes and then you resent it. So quite often, what one way of responding to dilemmas is to try and frame what the problem is. And often you end up with two extremes, neither of which will work. So neither of those extremes will work. Either you get in trouble with your boss and because you don't do what he or she wants you to do, or on the other hand, you feel resentful because you're being taken advantage of. So the trick is to try and find a response that's neither of those two extremes. Now, metta will help you get into the right kind of emotional space where response is more likely to emerge. If you're just in a state of aversion, there won't be any space. You'll just have your fish basket over your head, and you won't be able to see anything else from that. So part of what we're trying to do with ethics, meditation, and wisdom is just create a bit more space around what's happening in our life, so that we can find an adequate response to all the challenges that life will inevitably throw at us. So does that help, Colin? I mean, that's about as much as I can say. Maybe one thing I would say, actually, and this is where communication and friendship and everything comes in, is often what we need to do is we need to talk about these situations to try and get a bit of perspective and objectivity. So to say to a friend, look, I'm in this situation. Yeah, may you be well, but still no, exactly. Colin's just said, yes, it helps. No, may you be, what do you think? Oh, where's it gone? May you be well, but still no. So exactly. So you can say, sometimes it's possible, like you can not acquiesce to somebody else's requirement of you and still have metta for them. I think that's really, really important with the fourth stage. You're not just saying, may you be well doesn't mean just doing what they want you to do, because you have to have metta for yourself as well. And actually it's a bit uncomfortable being in that situation. But again, if you're able to, Anna says, consider changing manager. Easier said than done. But I mean, that is what's so good about work, is that you can't change your manager often. You can't change the situation. Your only option is to change the way that you're relating to it. So you're forced to be creative, because you can't change the circumstances very often. Now that can feel like being in prison, but it's an opportunity to really to learn something, if you can relate to it in the right kind of way. All of this is really, really easy to say. I'm aware of that. So forgive me if it sounds glib, because I know that the actual texture of it is much more complex. Oh yeah. Team Claire Emerald says, if your communications are coming in outside normal working hours, is it the case that you need to pull back on checking work communications outside work hours? Yeah. I mean, it depends on circumstance. You might be required to. But I mean, I think it is quite important to recognise that it is possible to set boundaries, within these things. But I think what's happened with do you remember the day? Some of you will remember this, when you leave work and there's no way for people to get in contact with you because they don't know your telephone number. You don't have an email, so you're free. But now work kind of follows us because we've got these devices. So yeah, that's a whole other thing about just not. I've got a practice of just not looking, because I know as soon as I look and I see something, I'll have to. It'll be in my mind. It'll affect me. I've had some horrible experiences like that, actually, where you see a text message at 10 o'clock at night, and it means that you don't sleep. And actually, it would have doesn't really make any difference if you saw it at 10 o'clock at night or at 7 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, let's leave it there. I wanted to talk about a few other little bits before what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to go into groups. But I just wanted to talk about the three fetters. So this is nothing to do with cheese. This is fetter, F-E-T-T-E-R-S. So a fetter, if you're not familiar with what a fetter is, I actually, when I first heard about fetters in Buddhism, I didn't know what a fetter was. But those old-fashioned, somebody's locked up in a dungeon in a medieval castle, and they've got that metal thing tied around their wrist or their ankle. That's a fetter. it's a very, very powerful image of incarceration. And the Buddhist tradition talks about bursting fetters, like breaking fetters that hold us down, that hold us back, that hold us, imprisoned. And there's these three fetters that stop us from seeing things as they really are. So seeing the truth of impermanence and insubstantiality. So the first one of those is belief in an unchanging self. Attachment to rites and rituals as ends in themselves, and doubt and indecision. There's 7 more of them, which I'm not going to go into this evening, just because it'll just bring us a little bit further away from what's going to be immediately practically applicable. Practically applicable. That's a hard thing to say. So what I'm going to do, and just to make this a little bit more down to earth, I'm just going to talk about it in terms of, belief in an unchanging self. I'm going to talk about as habit. Attachment to rites and rituals as ends in themselves, I'm going to talk about as superficiality. And doubt and indecision, I'm going to talk about as vagueness. Yeah. So those are the 3 fetters. So if we work with these tendencies, we can really begin to liberate ourselves. So the first one is habit. So that habit is, I've really talked about habit quite a bit. In a way, the delusion of selfhood is the fact that we take our habits to have some kind of fixity that they don't have. So we recognize that we've got a particular way of doing things, and we think that that's who we are. We identify with it as being intrinsic to us, when actually it's just that, it's just a habit. And really, this is one of the advantages of work, actually, is because quite often the work is repetitive. Quite often our work is repetitive. So I hope you don't mind, Stephen, but it just occurred to me I could use an example from your life, which Stephen is a translator, and about this time of the year, he translates German shipping reports, and it's much the same every year, just a little bits of it change. So it's the same task every time. And probably for a lot of us, it's going to be like this. So for me, it might be like, doing a course. I've done I don't know how many courses I've done at the Buddhist Center, but I've done quite a few, and it's like another course. So because the task is repetitive, you can actually see what you bring to it more clearly, because you can see the contrast. You can see that one day you do the job and you're frustrated and angry and resentful. Another day you do the task and you feel quite metaphor and relaxed and happy. So you can see the way that your mind affects the way that you experience what you do, because the thing that you do stays more or less the same. So this is a real advantage, actually, of bringing the kind of awareness to work that we've been looking at. And I just wanted to draw out another sort of reflection on that image of the spiral. So this is oopsie, where's my spiral gone? So this is a this is a spiral, another kind of spiral, a spiral staircase. But you see the image of a spiral. So what's lovely about a spiral is that it does go round and round. So that's the repetition, but it also goes up and up. So the round and round is like the repetition of a task in the way that I'm talking about the spiral. But the up and up is the way that our level of being and consciousness, our mental states, can actually begin to ascend, even though that the task is remaining the same. So basically, what I'm talking about here is we can, with a bit of awareness, we can bring some creativity to our habit. So creativity is the quality that we need to bring into being that breaks the fetter of habit. And I thought I'd give an example from music. So some of you will know about Miles Davis. Miles Davis, if you've not heard of him, is a very important American jazz musician who was at the forefront, the vanguard of jazz for several decades. And he was famous for not repeating himself. He kept moving forward and breaking new ground and with new ensembles and new styles and new kind of aesthetics even. And that was the thing he was famed for. And one of the things he used to say to his musicians, jazz is an improvisatory art form. So you're, as it were, making it up as you go along. It's not as simple as that, but that's kind of what's happening. And what Miles would say, apparently, to his musicians is, don't play what falls under your fingers. It's like he didn't want people just to go through the motions. He wanted people to find a new route, a new avenue, a new style, a new sound that they hadn't played before. That was one of the sort of key features of his aesthetic. That was what he was trying. That was what he was looking for. Is that sense of newness, of a sound that hadn't been heard before. So in a way, it's similar to what we're talking about here. Is that if we just play what's under our fingers, we'll just reinforce the habit. So we're trying to again create that space where we can be creative. Now, one of the features of a jazz ensemble, of course, is that it's a collective. It's a collective improvisation, and environment is crucially important. And a lot of what we're trying to do with the Buddhist Center is create an environment where that kind of communication can happen, where we can find something new, we can find a new way of responding to a situation that's the same. Because, of course, if you play a musical instrument, it's the same instrument. Like, I mean, I play the guitar. It's the same 6 strings. It's the same 10 fingers. But you're trying to find something within that which hasn't been found before. So that sense of kind of freshness and newness. So that's the creativity that breaks the fetter of habit. So superficiality is the second of these fetters. So traditionally, this is rites and rituals as ends in themselves. So what's happening here is we're just kind of acting from the surface. We're not really acting with thoroughness or with real attention to detail. And the reason that we're functioning that way is that we're divided. We're not able to give our full attention to what we're doing because our energies are divided. We're not whole. So again, awareness is absolutely crucial. This is one of the kind of magical things about awareness, is that when you start developing awareness, it's like it draws the different aspects of your being together in those lower reaches of the spiral path that I described a moment ago, of like faith giving rise to joy, giving a rise to rapture, giving rise to tranquility, giving rise to bliss, giving rise to concentration, describes that process whereby our mind becomes more and more whole. But in order to do that, we need, as it were, something to integrate around. We need some kind of task around which we can kind of gather ourselves together. And so in terms of work, that is the task that we're engaged in. It's like keeping on coming back to what it is that we're trying to do and committing ourselves to it. So commitment, in the sense of a deepening engagement with our activity, with the object of what we're engaging with, is what breaks the fetter of superficiality. Yeah, so commitment breaks the fetter of superficiality. And the third of these fetters is vagueness. So vagueness means indistinct. If something is vague, it's indistinct, not clearly expressed or identified, of uncertain or ill-defined meaning or character. So vagueness is very much associated with undecidedness. Now, we heard about this, and it's one of the 5 hindrances as well. So this is where we just don't want to make a decision. And this is a really... this is a killer of a fetter, because it stops us from being effective. So you notice this in work. I mean, what it amounts to often is procrastination. We just remain undecided about our course of action, and we put off making the decision until later. And you know that feeling that you get when you do that? Your energy becomes kind of dissipated. You know there's something you need to attend to. You know there's something you need to make a decision about, and you kick it into touch. You push it down the line. You put it on the long finger, as we say. So what we need to do is we need to bring in some clarity. Now, that's easier said than done. I mean, one little practice that I try and do, I don't always manage it, is I tend to be clearer. When I'm in the middle of my work, I tend to be clearer. And sometimes in the morning, it takes me a little while to get going. I can often be quite distracted. So what I've taken to doing is that when I finish work the previous day, what I do is I write a list of the things that I need to start with. And the practice is actually doing them and not doing other things that I, would rather do. but that's just a way I find that helps me to work with vagueness, because I can be a bit vague and a bit flaky. Um, another I'm galloping through this material a little bit. I'm just about finished. But one of the ways of developing clarity is actually talking to people who are a bit clearer than we are, and just trying to clarify the terms of what the problem is. So it's a little bit like what we're talking about in relation to your question column about having a difficult conversation with your boss. Sometimes just talking those situations over with a friend will help us clarify the terms of the problem. We might not be able to find the answer, but at least we can clarify what the problem is and ask the right kinds of questions. So I think often that's the key thing that we're trying to do, is ask the right question that brings us into somewhere new, where we can find the clarity that we need to engage more deeply with what is happening. So the three kind of go together. Habit, superficiality, and vagueness kind of reinforce each other in the same way that creativity, commitment, and clarity reinforce each other. But I think it's useful to think about them from those different perspectives as ways of not just developing insight, but kind of living from that insight, that understanding of the way things are. So I've just got another little, I went a bit mad with the slides this week, sorry about that, but I've got a little slide here. So you've got the three fetters. So habit, the fetter of habit, or belief in an essential unchanging self, is broken by creativity. Superficiality, or adherence or attachment to rites and rituals as ends in themselves, is broken by commitment. And the fetter of vagueness, or doubt and indecision, is broken with clarity. So I just wanted to finish with that material there. What we're going to do now is we're going to go into groups. So we'll spend the rest of the time that we have together in groups. So Stephen, maybe you could put the groups in for, we see 38, bit of quick maths here. Maybe you could say 20 minutes. Yeah. Maybe better to say 19 actually, just so we get back in time. Yeah. And really the idea for the group is just anything that you want to discuss about what we've talked about, and then just what you're going to take from the course. Yeah. So those are basically discussing what we talked about tonight, and then what you might want to spend a bit of time just going around and saying what you're going to bring from this course into your life. All right. So we'll do that now. Sorry, we haven't got. I was hoping we'd have a bit longer, but I believe it on a bit long. Sorry about that. So you have come to the end now. I just want to say a few things just before we close. Firstly, we will. It seems like there's been a lot of enthusiasm, so we will do another session next week, and we might start a group to follow this theme up in due course. I'll get in touch about that as and when we do that. Where are we now? So I just got to find my notes. So, and also just to say, now Stephen put the link in the chat box, that I'm teaching a course on metta that's starting in 3 weeks' time. It's called Who Hates the Metta Bhavana? And it's all about the metta bhavana and really getting to grips with what the practice is about. I mean, I think it's actually I think it's an amazingly transformative practice. And often what actually trips people up is not quite understanding what it's about. So that's what the course is about. So we've done it before and people have really gotten an awful lot out of it. So that's Who Hates the Metta Bhavana, which is starting on the 25th, I think, which is in 3 weeks. Also, just to remind you, and this is kind of my last, I won't do this again, well, that's my last chance, but just to remind you that now we're getting a bit of help from the government, as a lot of places are, but all of the money that we get apart from that, we get to run everything that we run is from donations. So if you've appreciated the course, do consider giving us a donation. And if you really like what the DBC is doing, another thing you can do, which makes a huge difference to us, is take out a standing order, which means giving a monthly gift. So I just wanted to remind you about that as well, that you can give a monthly gift if you want to support our work ongoingly, so that other people can gain access to what we're doing. And other than that, I just want to finish by thanking the team So I know there's been some really fantastic conversations that have taken place in the groups. I've really enjoyed them. Other people seem to have as well. So thanks very much to everybody on the team. It's just been really, really great having you. It's really added something to the course to have that interaction with everybody. And also, lastly, so I've gone a little bit over, I just want to thank Stephen. So Stephen's been doing the tech support. It's his first time and he's done brilliantly. It's all worked really, really brilliantly well. So thanks to Stephen for looking after the tech support. Stephen is covering for Kevin, who is our centre manager, who is away getting ordained. So he'll come back with a new name and one of these things. And if you want to know more about that, you can ask somebody. But we haven't got time now. So anyway, thanks for coming, and it's been really great. And thanks also for for being sort of guinea pigs. Really, I've just been trying some things out on you, so it's been I'm really grateful that you've sort of been really receptive to that. And I'll hopefully see you again at some other event. Maybe one day we'll get to meet in person if we haven't done before. Okay, and stick around if you've got questions and stuff, And I'll let you know about the class. I mean, we'll do a class next week. Did I say that? I think I did. But I'll let you know about that tomorrow.